Hey y'all, welcome back to Is Anybody Out There? I'm Sophie, your host.
And I'm Rachel.
And this is the podcast where I try to scare her. Get ready to be frightened by tales of the mysterious and macabre, of the grotesque and the morbid.
That just unfrightened me.
You ruined my spooky intro.
Because I was feeling very unspooked. I think if you had some spooky music.
Okay. I can do spooky music.
I'd be a little more spooky.
Get ready to be frightened by tales of the mysterious and macabre. Be frightened, okay?
I know I will be. In probably 5 minutes or less.
We're talking about Edgar Allan Poe.
I frighten easily, but I love Edgar Allan Poe, so that's where I'm I'm not scared yet, because the mention of him intrigues me.
What is your favorite Edgar Allan Poe? What do you know about him?
Well, I really love The Raven. And is it him? It's not him, right? Who has the story about, sitting in the cafe. Is that Hemingway?
Hemingway?
Hemingway? You know who I'm talking about. I don't know a lot about him. I avoid him because of that movie that we watched.
Oh my word.
And so after that, I put him in a box that just said, sad things I avoid.
We do not recommend the movie In Love and War.
No.
It was probably...
Or it's Hemingway. Oh my goodness, not Hemingway. It might have been him. But, I like The Raven. I like The Telltale Heart, which is what most people probably know. I know that I've read more too, but that's
a pretty good one.
I read that. Most of my Poe knowledge is from high school, so it was a few years back, so I don't remember every poem.
Have you ever read The Murders on the Rue Morgue, or
I might have
The Mystery of Mary Rogers?
I might have. If you read them to me, they might ring a bell.
So, if you don't know who Edgar Allan Poe is, he's a writer during the 19th century who is credited with creating the modern detective story and developing the Gothic horror story, and being a significant early baseline of the science fiction genre.
So, this is going to be a scary story, as I hope I've gotten across.
You have.
It has all the elements of a classic Gothic horror tale. It has mystery and suspense, storms, howling wind, a woman in distress, high emotion, even possibly elements of the supernatural.
Ooh.
Today we are talking about the lives and deaths of two people who became unknowingly intertwined within the annals of history. The two never knew each other. One has been all but forgotten to time, and the other has found a place among the most famous literary names of all, to be remembered forever, and yet they both affected the other's memory. Because have you ever heard of the case of Mary Cecilia Rogers?
No, I have not.
I didn't think so. She's been pretty much forgotten, and I had never heard of this case either until I was doing some research into Edgar Allan Poe, and I was like, interesting.
Sorry, you all can't see it, but she just made a very funny, shocked face.
This is so exciting to me. I love talking about this era, this industrial revolution time. It's kind of steampunky.
Yeah.
So not that a true crime case is ever exciting per se, but
I do feel you think about it in a Sherlock Holmes kind of vibe. This era, that's what I think of too.
So my heart goes out to the family of Mary Rogers. This is a terrible tragedy that happened. But this time period is interesting to me to talk about. So I'm going to set the scene here a little bit. We're talking the early to mid 19th century. The Napoleonic Wars are happening and ending over in Europe. There's turmoil going on in the Latin American countries. There's a lot of different revolutions happening in France and Italy. It's just an interesting time.
Yeah, lots going on.
Economically, historically. In America, the abolitionist movement is gaining momentum. The Louisiana Purchase is happening, and this is also when the series Bloody Jack takes place.
Yes. Yes. My favorite series. Highly recommend.
Highly, highly recommend. That is a really good and really well-researched series. So if you like historical fiction, definitely read those. And scientifically, of course, we have a ton of different changes and discoveries during this time. Charles Darwin introduces the theory of evolution. There's a bunch of new inventions. So there's just a whole bunch of change and possibility. And the general feeling was one of intrigue and excitement. And into this world of possibility was born a baby to Elizabeth Arnold Poe, an actress from England, and David Poe Jr., an actor from Baltimore. In 1809, Edgar Poe was born on January 19th. Within the first 3 years of Poe's life, his mother would die, and his father would leave him with his godfather, John Allan, and his wife in Richmond, Virginia. This placement is what earned Poe the name Allan, cementing his famous moniker forever, Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
And he would grow up with his godparents. In the meantime, around 1820 in Connecticut, another baby was born to parents Phoebe and Daniel Rogers. She is given the name Mary Cecilia Rogers. There was speculation at the time, because her mother was 47 years old when she had Mary, that she was actually the daughter of Phoebe's older daughter out of wedlock, which was like a scandal. So they said it was her daughter. But that's not really important to the story, so we're not going to talk about it again. There's not really any proof of that, so...
That doesn't really impact later on at all.
Right, no. In 1826, Edgar Allan Poe enrolled in the University of Virginia, studying there for 11 months before, after losing a lot of his godfather's money to gambling, Poe became extremely destitute. He was so poor that he had to burn his own furniture just to keep warm.
Oh my goodness.
So he goes back to his godfather, John Allan, to ask him for more money. But John Allan is like, no, heck no. I just gave you a whole bunch of money and you gambled it away. He's so mad that Poe has lost all of this money due to his unwise decisions. He refuses to give him any more money.
Well, that's probably good.
So Poe has to drop out of school. He can't afford to live there anymore.
Oh.
He goes back home to Richmond to live with his godfather, only to find that his fiancée, Elmira, has become engaged to another guy.
Well, dang. This is a sad time for Poe.
I know, but, I mean, karma? Is that too extreme to be karma?
No, I just feel like this happens when you make bad decisions often. If you're someone who doesn't want to make bad decisions, like maybe his fiancée was. Then,
right. I mean, you could...
Now's the time to leave. If you know someone's a big gambler and you're like, I would like to have money in my future. You know, I don't know. I don't feel like it's sad for him, but it does seem just kind of like consequence of his actions.
It's kind of fair to say that, I think, for sure. But he's devastated, so he moves to Boston, and he joins the army just so he can make money to write, because all he wants to do with his whole life is just sit in his comfy chair and write stories.
You can relate to that,
which, okay, I definitely can relate to that.
That's pretty much all you want to do, too.
Yes. He wasn't in the army too long, though, because his godfather, John Allan, decided to actually buy him out of the army, which apparently was something that...
I didn't know you could do that, yeah.
I don't think you can do that anymore, but apparently in this time you could. So he buys him out on the condition that he go to the academy at West Point. Poe goes to West Point, and he's only there for a really short time, and then he's apparently determined to just be a little turd. And he doesn't go to any classes or lectures for a whole week. And for this, he's expelled from West Point. And after this, John Allan is like, buddy, I'm sorry, but we're done with you. And so he disowns him.
He did.
I feel like he gave him a
fair shake.
He gave him a good upbringing. I mean, I don't know what the motivation was behind.
But like, seems like he gave him money too. Apparently enough that he would have been okay, but he lost it.
It seems like he cared about Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, at least enough to try to set him up for success.
Right. Meanwhile, when Mary Rogers is 14, so we're moving over to the Mary Rogers story.
All right.
Her father, James, unfortunately dies in a steamboat explosion.
Oh, my word.
She and her mother decide to move to New York City to try to make a new life for themselves. Her mother buys a boarding house and starts a business renting out rooms to the men about town. And Mary helps out here until she's 18, when at this point she has already become pretty renowned, like famous around the neighborhood for her beauty. And so local tobacco store owner John Anderson decided to hire her as a cigar girl, so to work behind a counter selling cigars at his store. This was kind of a bold move, as women didn't usually work in positions like that yet.
Was this kind of like being a bartender for that time almost, or did was it like a little bit different?
No, it was kind of the same. The men would come in and buy their smokes and hang out and smoke and flirt with her. Yeah, it had a lot of like nice gentlemen coming in there and people that seemed like
that seems like something you have to have money for.
Yeah, so I don't think it was like a seedy place. Okay. I don't think she was like she wasn't known as like a person of ill repute or anything like that. She was like, no, she was beloved in the town, in the neighborhood that she was in. Everybody knew her and loved her. She was beautiful.
I was just wondering if in this time that like meant something a little bit different culturally. Like
people would come from all over the city to buy their cigars from her because she was known as, quote, the beautiful cigar girl. What do you think about that?
I think that that's good for business, but also something that like your beauty could work against you. Obviously, like I think especially in that time, like if you're a woman, you don't have a lot of protection, a lot of rights, especially if you are working a job kind of more independently. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's setting you up for bad company around you, bad interest, I guess.
I don't like that they just called her the beautiful cigar girl. Like
what's her name?
Her name is Mary.
The beautiful Mary Cigar Girl.
Sure, yeah, right?
I feel like that's at least a little better. She has an identity.
Yeah. But anyway, during this time, Mary is known to be having a relationship with a sailor whose name was William Clearcut, but there's not too much known about their relationship. So we just know that it was like happening.
Okay.
A relationship about which more is known is Edgar Allan Poe's marriage, which occurred in 1835. So moving back to Edgar Allan Poe, he decided to move back to Baltimore, where he had some relatives. One relative in particular sparked his interest. He married his cousin.
Ah! All right.
And it gets even better than that. Because his cousin is 13.
Oh, that's so nice.
And he's 26.
So good for a marriage.
Things are looking up for him. He's married. Woohoo! He's got his whole married life ahead of him. He had the support of the family. That's great. He also got a job as a literary critic with the periodical Southern Literary Messenger, where he has begun to gain some renown for being rather ruthless on the local authors at the time.
Oh.
But he loses this job, possibly due to excessive drinking, and the two move to New York City.
That seems to add up for him. Excessive drinking, losing his job.
Which, if you remember, is where Mary Rogers lives.
That's right.
And around the same time that Edgar Allan Poe moved to New York City, Mary Rogers disappeared.
Oh.
She disappeared. On October 5th, 1838, the newspaper The Sun reported that, quote, Miss Mary Cecilia Rogers had disappeared from her home, end quote. Her mother claimed to have found a suicide note, according to that article. The newspapers wrote all about the missing beauty from the cigar shop. They were speculating everything from she went to have an abortion to it being an elaborate publicity stunt of Anderson's. Everybody's like, where did she go? We need our Mary back. A couple weeks later, she comes back. And she's really confused by all of the media attention. She was like, I've just been out visiting my aunt. But her mother didn't know anything about that, which is kind of weird to me.
That is weird. The suicide note is very strange, too. Like, why would you write that and then be like, oh, what's strange, everyone, when I come back?
We do have to remember that during this time, newspapers are not 100% reliable. I did get most of the information that I have for this from newspapers at the time, but it was very hard, actually, to weed out what was fact and what was, like, exaggerated. So I don't know about the suicide note. It is strange if suicide note found. That is kind of a weird detail. Oh, just for the record, Edgar Allan Poe, like I said, he was in New York City at this time. He did go to that cigar shop. He was known to go to the cigar shop, so he might have been an acquaintance of Mary's, but there's not really any proof that they knew each other. There's an urban legend that's been circling around this story that the two of them knew each other, and, you know, there's variations of that. But there's no evidence that they knew each other. So she begins to go back to working at the cigar shop. She's more popular than ever. She's more famous than ever because everybody's like, Mary's back, Mary's back, oh yeah!
So if it was a publicity stunt, it worked.
Exactly. And during this time, one of her mother's boarders, a man named Alfred Cromlin, had fallen desperately in love with her, but she was like, no thank you. She just wanted to be friends with him. She basically friend-zoned him. Although she seemed to care about him, they were good friends. She just didn't want to be in a relationship with him because she was actually dating another boarder whose name was Daniel Payne. He was a cork cutter, and the two got engaged in June of 1841. Eventually, Cromwell decided he couldn't live with the love of his life living with her fiancé.
That's fair.
They all lived in the same boarding. They all lived in the same house.
That'd be hard.
Yeah, so he decided to move out as soon as they got engaged because it was just too difficult for him. He did, however, tell Mary that if she or her mother ever needed help, they could always come to him. This is kind of interesting because, for whatever reason, when Mary slipped a note under his new apartment's door on July 23rd, 1841, requesting him to call on her as soon as he could, he never responded.
Oh.
On July 25th, 1841, Mary told her fiancé Daniel Payne that she would be visiting her aunt, cousin, and other family members. She asked if he could meet her at the bus stop after she went out to visit her cousin, so he could walk her home. Daniel had a busy day that day, traveling about. He went to visit his brother, he even was able to squeeze in a nap, and when he woke up, it was storming really heavily outside. He figured that Mary would just stay with her family, so he decided to stay home. Which is kind of a good...
I think that fair. Makes sense, but also, like, wouldn't you be worried that she might not have? And she's out in the storm waiting for you?
When she didn't come home the next day, Daniel went to her aunt's house and asked about her. He was like, where did she go? Was she here? And her family said they had never been expecting her, and they hadn't seen her.
Oh, my word.
So she was nowhere to be found. At a complete loss of what to do, Daniel and Mary's mother placed a notice in the paper saying that she was missing and offering a reward for information. This is how Cromwell found out about Mary's disappearance.
And that was the guy that was interested in her. She was not interested in him.
Exactly.
Okay.
Her friend, yes. He immediately went to the boarding house to find out what was going on, but then him and Daniel got in a big fight, each accusing the other one of not doing enough to help Mary in her time of need.
Aww.
3 days later, Cromwell and a friend decide to go looking for Mary out in Hoboken, New Jersey. While they're out there, a body was discovered floating in the Hudson River, 200 yards off the shore near Sybil's Cave. By the time the two got to where the body was to see if it was Mary, a crowd had already gathered. Cromwell was asked to identify the body, and he did identify it as Mary Cecilia Rogers. However, for some reason, he was unable to identify the body by her face, instead referencing the, quote, hair on her arms, end quote.
What?
Isn't that a weird detail?
That's a very weird detail. I will say, I have met people with, like, very distinctly hairy arms. So that's, like, that is notable. That does tell me something about the person. But, like, that's definitely not what I would go to ID a body. Pretty much any other thing.
Well, this makes me think that her face was unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Like, he couldn't...
But they didn't say that her, like, about anything that might have happened to her
No,
face?
they didn't. Just so you know, we're going to be talking about the post-mortem examination. If you're not into talking about dead bodies, then you might want to skip forward like 30 seconds because it maybe is a little gory.
I am not into it, but I am forced to be here. I can't skip, and I'm sad about it, but it's fine.
No, close your ears. I'm just kidding. They didn't. I think, but it is referenced later in the theories that her body was more decomposed than it should have been. Possibly.
Oh.
So she'd only been in the water for 3 days. So decomposition would not normally happen so quickly that her face was not recognizable. But in fact, depending on the temperature of the water, bodies actually tend to decompose more slowly. Because if it's cold, you know, they'll decompose more slowly. So I think maybe insects or animals were getting at the face and making
fish,
it...
maybe?
Right, making it so that Cromwell couldn't recognize it. But he
that's
recognized her
awful.
arms. A coroner's inquest was put together with Dr. Cook conducting the post-mortem examination and a Justice Merritt presiding at the inquest. Dr. Cook noted these things about the corpse. That she had striations on her wrist, bruising and damage in a complete circle around her wrist, signaling that she had been tied at the wrists.
Okay.
She had a mark about the size of a man's thumb on her jugular vein.
Oh,
and
weird.
2 or 3 marks on the other side of her neck resembling fingers.
So she was strangled?
Like she
Like
was in a
choked?
stranglehold.
Yeah.
Her arms were very tightly clenched to her sides. This was at first thought to be rigor mortis, although it would have been too early for rigor mortis to have set in. And later it was determined to have been caused by a cadaveric spasm, which is something that can happen when a person is clenching their fists at the time of death.
Weird.
There was significant damage to the skin on her back, as if she had been roughly pushed up against something, or if she'd been struggling against something hard. Her dress was torn in several places. Part of her dress had been torn and tied around her mouth, and another part had been torn and wrapped around her 3 times to make a sort of device that would have made it easier for the killer to carry the body to dispose of it. That's kind of significant, so remember that.
Okay.
All the knots were made from sailor's knots, not what was then known as a lady's knot. I don't really know the difference, but I assume they're just different kinds of knots, and one was
some
more
people would know
commonly
one,
used.
than the other.
The coroner noted that she had had sex recently, and that it appeared to be non-consensual, unfortunately. And he also noted that she was not pregnant. Cromwell and his friends stayed in Hoboken overnight, then went back to New York, bringing a lock of Mary's hair and her shoes home and giving them to her mother.
Oh,
Isn't that sad?
That's so sad.
In the meantime, a jurisdictional dispute between New York and New Jersey was going on because neither wanted the case, and the newspapers were having a field day. Several suspects were arrested within the first few days of the case, including her fiancé, Daniel Payne, an ex-lover named William Clearcut, and a local wood engraver named Joseph Morse.
So she was not married to Daniel already. I had thought that they were already married. They weren't. They were still engaged?
They were still engaged.
Okay.
She wasn't married to anybody. So Joseph Morse was suspected because he was a frequent customer at the cigar store, and his wife said he was missing the day of the murder. He was a young man in his late 20s with black whiskers who dressed neatly according to the press at the time. He had apparently been agitated when the police confronted him, and he had a note in his pocket from his apprentice that asked him to lay low and cut his mustache as the police were looking for him. Witnesses also placed him on the boat to Hoboken, and sitting on a bench near Sybil's cave with a woman having a heated discussion.
That's very interesting. Very suspicious.
However, within a few days, a young lady quietly came forward and confessed that she and Mr. Morse were having an affair, and it was she who was arguing with him in New Jersey that day.
Very odd, like same place, same time.
Isn't
though.
that crazy?
Yeah.
After that, the case against him basically falls apart and he's exonerated. Clearcut and Payne were both questioned and they were both released rather quickly. Sources are unclear as to why William Clearcut was released so fast, but Daniel Payne was able to prove his whereabouts and movements of the day in question through signed affidavits and several witnesses who confirmed that they saw him. At this point, the police's only theory is that the murder was an instance of gang violence, and that Mary was kidnapped by a, quote, large gang of ruffians. 2 witnesses, named Bradshaw and Thomas, claimed to have seen a woman carried into the woods by 6 men, although the 2 didn't think she looked distressed.
Oh. Like, that's just a normal thing? That's just a happy time? To be carried off into the woods by 6 ruffians? Oh, we don't need to help her. These ruffians are taking her away. It's fine. All right.
Yeah, sure. Sure, Bradshaw. An anonymous letter also came in, saying that the writer had seen a woman dragged into a boat.
Oh.
But a woman came forward and said that this was just a prank. So the police are basically just running around chasing their tails. They're having all these leads, but nothing is going anywhere. Then, on September 2nd, in 1841, a thicket was discovered on Hoboken.
A thicket was discovered?
A thicket. in the thicket of things.
Okay, that kind of thicket?
A thicket is like a bush.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so yeah.
But why is
bush,
that discovered on him? I'm not understanding this phrase.
No, not on him. On Hoboken. It's the place.
Oh, that's right. That's
It's
not
like
the guy. I was thinking it was William. What's his name? The
Clear Cut.
the guy who didn't answer the note. For some reason,
that's not.
I thought that's what you're talking
not the guy who didn't answer the note. Okay.
What?
Okay, I will explain.
Review. Do a review.
Okay, you remember who Edgar Allan Poe is?
Of course.
Okay, then I won't go into him. Okay, so then we have Mary Rogers.
Right, and Daniel is her fiance.
Daniel is her fiance. Okay.
Was Alfred the name of the guy with the note?
Alfred Crommelin
Okay.
was the name of the guy with the note.
Okay.
Clear Cut was a guy she had dated before both of those.
Oh, so we didn't actually really get into him other than just right then him being a suspect.
Right.
Okay, I was assuming because he was in that suspect lineup that he was that other guy because I find that other guy suspicious.
Okay, you find Crommelin suspicious?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
All right,
So,
we can get back to it now. I'm all caught up.
going back. A thicket is discovered.
All right, and it's just a bush.
And it's just a bush.
Because that guy isn't who I thought he was, and it's a place.
Yes. A thicket is discovered 300 yards from a tavern run by a German immigrant located between the road to the house and to the ferry. Within the thicket, there's broken branches and signs of a struggle, and the tavern keeper's son discovered that there was a handkerchief in there, a parasol, a petticoat, and the handkerchief was embroidered with MR.
Oh.
Which is significant because Mary Rogers.
Right.
And all of these items were covered in mildew, so it was likely that they had been there for at least 3 weeks. So that would match up with the timeline because this is about 3 weeks later. Another story came out a few weeks later. The tavern keeper said that she had served Mary and a dark-complexioned man. They'd gotten drinks and Mary had gotten lemonade. She said that the clothes matched the ones in the thicket and the ones that were wearing him. And she also said that Daniel Payne didn't look like the man she saw with Mary that day.
Okay, well, that's good. For Daniel.
That story, the tavern keeper's story, came out 2 months after the body was found. She decided to come out with this story. So, it could be unreliable. Eyewitness testimony is frequently unreliable, especially when it's so far after when it happened. So, a theory from this is possibly that Mary and a companion, dark-complexioned man, go out for whatever reason and it starts to rain, forcing them to take shelter in the tavern. They think the storm is over, so they leave, only for the storm to take up again, causing them to seek shelter under some bushes, which is where she ended up being murdered. But this is kind of a weird theory. What happened to the man? Was the man the one who murdered her?
Well, yeah, because if that's the theory, then it's like, well, why did he go into the tavern in the first place? Like, why would he have cared if they got wet? Unless he was, like, planning something later, I guess. But it just seems like a little bit strange.
He, like, wasn't planning something and it just was a...
Opportunity arose,
right?
I guess.
I don't know. That one seems kind of weird. Could he also have been murdered if it was perpetrated by a gang?
Oh, true. Maybe.
Did he run away and not help her and he was ashamed of doing that?
And so he never came forward?
So the marks on Mary's back are interesting. This did indicate that she had been held on a hard surface, and this thicket, this bush, was like on top of a big stone. So that would line up as well.
Yeah.
It was also close to the river, which would have been easy for the murderer or murderers to dump the body in the river.
Her in, yeah.
So, Daniel Payne, he went to Hoboken, stopped at the tavern, and asked where the thicket is. This is a couple months later. Then he went to another hotel, asked for a drink, and then he asked for a hat because he didn't have a hat and he wanted to wear one. I don't really get that. It's kind of a weird detail.
Maybe he was bald and self-conscious of it. I don't know. I'm just making that up.
Then he said to the person who lent him a hat, quote, "Perhaps you don't know who I am. I am Payne, the lover of Mary Rogers. No one knows my troubles," end quote. Then he left the hotel and nobody saw him again until he was found incoherent on the brink of death on a beach near Sybil's Cave. He had drunk a lethal dose of laudanum in order to commit suicide.
Oh.
He left a note saying, quote, "To world, here I am on the spot. God forgive me for my misfortune and my misspent time," end quote.
Oh.
And this happened on October 7th, 1841. Payne's suicide led people to believe that he was responsible, Which I guess is understandable, but...
I guess it's understandable, but I don't see it. I feel like his suicide note was rather good. Like, I mean, not that I like people committing suicide or think that it's ever, like, good, but that just seems like a very sensitive, simple thing to say to, like, cover all your bases.
He's, like, grieving.
He's just, like, really sad and sad about what's happened to him, and
he was just like, I want to be with the woman I love.
Yeah.
And if he was responsible, why did he have to ask for directions to the place where she died? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. He apparently was, like, incoherent, and people thought he was drunk when they found him, but he wasn't drunk. He had only been seen drinking once in the past 3 years. So he didn't ever drink until after Mary died. So I really think that he was just a sad man who really loved her. And
the fiancé.
So Poe became interested in the case and followed it closely. He actually wanted to solve it. So he wrote The Mystery of Maria Roget using the details of Mary Rogers' case, but setting it in France as a sequel to his The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is commonly considered the first detective story, like, ever in the whole genre, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it included the main character that he's came up with, C. Auguste Dupont. Though he appropriated the details of Mary's story, he still faced the very real challenge of actually solving the murder. He had to actually figure out what happened for his story. And that's why he was writing this story, was so that he could kind of piece together in his mind what happened to Mary.
Like how he would have done it, sort of a thing.
Right. And I think it's actually kind of interesting from, like, writer to writer, because he's using his character and his real world, like, through his character's eyes. That is really cool. That. Like, that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. He wants to figure this out, but he can't understand
put himself there,
things.
So he puts his character there.
Right, exactly. So that just is very interesting to me. So the police were no closer to solving the case. They had basically hit a dead end. Like many other stories of the mid-19th century, the mystery of Marie Roget was serialized, which means there was, like, pieces of it in a magazine.
Oh.
Appearing in November issues of Stoughton's Ladies' Companion. The third part, in which Dupont puts together the details of the crime, but left the identity of the criminal up in the air, was to appear at the end of the month, but a shocking piece of news delayed the final installment.
They found the guy, and it was Cromwell. Or whatever his name. Cromlin.
Nope.
He confessed. Cromlin confessed.
Nope, it's crazier than that.
Poe did it. She was never dead. She didn't die. It wasn't her.
Interesting that you say that. That is interesting that you say that. In November 1842, right? Frederica Loss, she's the tavern keeper. The cavern keeper. Came forward and swore that Roger's death was the result of a failed abortion attempt.
Oh.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
She was actually shot by one of her sons. Frederica Loss, the tavern keeper.
Oh, the tavern keeper was shot.
She was shot by one of her sons.
Oh, my.
And she's delirious with fever and dying. She said she had played a part in Mary's death. She said Mary had come to her for an illegal abortion, and she'd gotten a doctor for her, and something had gone wrong, and she had passed away. Mary passed away. Word. They planted the clothing in the thicket to detract attention from them. And it was known that the tavern keeper, Frederica Loss, had been a known disciple of the famous abortionists, Madame Restell. Oh. She was Madame Restell, she was known for performing these illegal abortions, and many women died from them. But this theory I feel like this theory has holes. Like, why were Mary's wrists bound?
Well, maybe, just as a distraction afterwards. Maybe, but I don't know how hard you can... I don't know. I guess I don't know much about what I would do to try and cover up a murder. I haven't thought too much about it. But, I guess you would really want it to be convincing if you accidentally killed someone during an abortion that you're not supposed to be doing.
I don't think the blood
I don't know.
Bruises the same way.
Well, I was wondering that. If you're already dead... would you have to really work hard to bruise someone and cut them? I don't know.
I think cutting them would be fine, but I think bruising, I think the blood...
Like pools different?
Well, I know it pools different. We talked about that on a different episode.
Yeah, true.
But I don't know about bruising. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that later. I love talking about dead bodies. Sorry, people, if you hate it.
I don't love it.
So, the police decide that this was a false confession. She was just talking out of her butt while she's dying, basically, is what the police decide. They don't have any supporting evidence to confirm this, so it kind of is up in the air. It just ends up going nowhere. So that is the chronological telling of what happened.
I don't know. I kind of believe that lady. Like, I feel like, why would you just say that? Like, the perfect... Although, I guess I could see two different camps here. Because if you're already dying and you've gotten away with it, why would you say anything? You know? But I guess guilty conscience, you have to get it off. But that's what makes me think, like, maybe it was true. You know? Was that, like, she couldn't help but say it because she's dying and she wants to make sure she can rest easy, I guess.
Do you think she could have gotten it mixed up with somebody else? Like, maybe that scenario
or maybe
happened and...
What kind of it makes me think of is, like, what if she did perform an abortion on Mary and, like, maybe it did go wrong, but, like, what if the other details didn't fall into place? Like, what if Mary didn't die? What if the woman just was afraid she was going to because something happened afterwards or whatever, and then something happened to her as she was, like, leaving the place? I don't know.
What if... Oh, I think I just solved it. Okay, what if... You remember when she disappeared before? Mm-hmm. What if she really had gone to get an illegal abortion?
Yeah.
From the tavern keeper?
Well, that's kind of what, like, I'm saying. I think I see where you're going with
yeah, and then she had been, like, afraid that something had happened, and then when she ended up dead...
Yeah, she was like,
she
this
knew
is my
more
fault.
than what she was saying, but she wasn't able to articulate it really because she was dying, so she wasn't able to say, like, she had this abortion earlier,
right?
And then... She ended up dead.
She didn't
couldn't
necessarily
connect it.
kill her and throw her out there,
right?
Or something. I don't know. That could be.
Well, that goes together with my other theory of what I think happens later, which I will tell you later after we talk about some of these theories. So the first one is the Daniel Payne theory. So the tavern keeper said it wasn't him at the tavern, and he provided signed affidavits from witnesses. I don't think it was him. The newspapers seemed to think it was him. Both Payne and Poe suffered severe character assassination by the newspapers after their death. I think that his suicide was just him being sad.
Yeah, I think
that's
so.
My personal opinion. And it's another thing, like with, do you remember when we did the Hinterkaifeck with the guy who died in war? And the people were, like, smearing his name through the mud because they said he had perpetrated the murders at Hinterkaifeck.
Oh, yes.
It's another thing like that. Like, I kind of don't even want to talk about the Daniel Payne theory because I really don't think it's respectful.
I don't think it is respectful, and I don't really see how he could have been involved. With just the small evidence that we've been given, really doesn't seem likely.
Yes. If you hear some crinkling, it's Rachel's cat in her tunnel.
She decided that right now is the best time to go into her super noisy little tunnel. So every time she moves, it'll crinkle.
So the next theory is the gang theory, which is the one that the police were thinking initially. So what do you think about that?
I mean, from what I know from Bloody Jack, a lot of gang violence, like press gangs and stuff, like, were happening around. So I think it's likely.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely possible. I think that there are some knocks against this theory, like... The thicket wasn't really big enough to hide multiple people. And Poe said that there was no need to bind the wrists if there were multiple people. And I kind of think that that's a good... Like, if there's a
you
big
really
gang,
couldn't take her with 6 people. You had to tie her up.
Yeah, and that goes for the carrying device thing, too.
Yes,
like if there's 6
couldn't
people,
easily toss her into the water.
Right, yeah. So I kind of think...
That does seem a little... I feel like that doesn't toss it out completely, but, like, it's suspicious.
Yeah.
It's not quite adding up.
Another thing about this theory is that usually, and like not always, but usually when there's more than one person involved in a crime, someone will come forward, someone will crack.
Yeah.
And nobody did. So it's again, not saying that it's not this theory, but just another little So then there's the failed abortion theory. This was a story that was sensationalized by the newspapers. They added in a whole bunch of nonsense. So it was hard to know what really to take seriously. The press believed the abortion confession from Frederica Loss, but the police didn't really think it was real. Newspapers finally decided that they were going to recant, and they decided that it wasn't real either.
Daniel lived, right? Like, he didn't actually end up...
No, he passed away.
From the laudanum poisoning when he was incoherent?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought he was just almost dead.
No,
and trying to commit suicide.
When they found him, he was almost dead, but he did end up passing away.
And then he died. Oh.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, well, what if, did Daniel ever say, like, yes, she was pregnant, it was mine, and she went and had this done? Like, is that why he passed away? Did he know this was happening and felt guilty and responsible about the abortion thing?
Maybe.
I don't know. He died, so he wouldn't be able to say either way. No one would ever know.
Right. The abortion theory, to me, doesn't really explain anything. Like, if you think back to the post-mortem examination, they would have been able to tell if there had been any digging around in her crevices. That's true. She said she wasn't pregnant. They said that she wasn't pregnant and that she had non-consensual sex.
Right.
So...
Which, I don't think that would be as devastating as right after you have an abortion.
Especially if you died from an abortion. I just feel like there would be
I feel like it would be quite awful in there.
I don't know why there would be all of this stuff on her back, injuries from, like, trying to get away. Maybe
all I can think of is that they were trying to cover it up, and they were, after she did die, we're just like, okay, let's make it look like something happened.
Like she was just dragging her body around?
That they were dragging her body, yeah, and just trying to make it look like something had happened.
Oh,
that's all I can think of why that would be.
Oh, can you imagine?
Like that?
That is horrible. I do not like that. I hope that is not what happened. It's terrible. Is not good. So I guess we think there's a possibility here, but not necessarily.
I feel like it doesn't seem not likely. It could have been that. I don't know if that's like the strongest evidence or anything.
I think it's possible that she had an abortion. I don't know if she had an abortion and it caused her death.
Okay. I see
but I think that there might be a connection, like...
But you think it's part of it?
Motively? Yeah, like with the motive, but I don't know. So then we have the faked death theory. So this is the theory that the body that was found actually wasn't Mary Rogers, and that for whatever reason she either faked her death or was misidentified.
Oh. I feel like misidentified, if you're just going to say misidentified, I don't think so, because how are you just like misidentified but then no one hears from you again? I think it would have to be faking your death.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Unless coincidence and something happened to her elsewhere.
So then do you think she faked her death so that she could be with someone else? Like she didn't want to be with Daniel?
I don't know. That could also line up with the whole abortion theory. If she had like an affair with someone, had an abortion, realized, no, I do want to be with this man. How do I like go back, fake your death, run off and be with him? I don't know. I don't feel like that seems very likely.
But yeah, that seems like a little bit of a
seems
stretch.
Like a long shot, yeah.
So I'm like not really on board with the fake death theory.
No.
I don't know why there would have been evidence planted in the thicket.
Yeah.
If it was a fake death, like why would you need to do that?
Where would you get the actual body?
Yeah, that's true. Like what
if you faked your death, would you be that willing to go that far? Because I feel like in that time, like nowadays, you might be able to come up with some sort of convincing-ish dummy for a little bit. And then once they did the autopsy, okay, no, it's not real. But then, especially in this time, I don't think you could get something so
well, but you
similar.
know what?
But people died all the time.
Grave robbing
yes, that's
really big.
Just borrow someone.
Grave robbing was really, really a big problem during this time, actually.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't know.
You wait for the latest funeral, and then when everyone's gone, you grab it and do your plan. But I feel like someone would notice. I feel like if it was something like that, and this body wasn't too decomposed, I feel like it's not a very likely
the
theory.
decomposition is why people think that this theory might be the case, because they say that for 3 days in the water, she was more decomposed than that.
That's, well...
So that's kind of interesting, but I think that there's just too many variables that could cause that, like I was saying with the animals.
Yeah.
And there's just, I don't know. There's too many variables to be able to say definitively that decomposition wouldn't have taken place definitely in 3 days.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm not sure about that.
So that one seems kind of like a long shot to me. I don't really go for that one. Then we have the Alfred Cromlin theory, and this is the one that you had been kind of hinting at earlier.
Yeah, I'm like pretty positive. I don't even know the whole theory, and I'm like pretty positive that it was this guy.
So he might have been mad that she rejected him. That might have been a possible motive. He had left the first week of June. He moved out of the boarding house, but he offered his help, so it seemed like they were on, good terms.
Right.
I don't know why he didn't actually give
That's
her
to me
help.
what does it is she like asked for help for something, and he didn't give his help, which is kind of like weird to me.
So the theory here is that maybe he actually did meet up with her, and then he took her to Hoboken, tried to win her affections, but she rejected him again, and then he killed her in a jealous rage.
See, I feel like this is likely. And he did argue with Daniel, like, literally right after this happened.
Yeah. Her mother said that the reason she wanted to meet him was just to sell him something that she'd been given from a man who boarded with her. So, like, he was a solicitor or something. He worked with money, so she wanted him to cash a check, basically.
Okay.
That's what her mother said. But, I mean, it might not be that. She might be covering for Mary. She might not know. That might just be what Mary
That might
told
have been
her.
the story, yeah.
You think it's him?
I think it's him. I feel like out of all these theories, that's the most likely.
Do you think it ties into the abortion theory?
I think it could. I think there could be possibility. This is like all speculation.
Oh, yeah.
And just totally spitballing random things that like could have happened.
We don't know. Nobody knows.
No, but that like, they were good friends. He was very interested. What if he took advantage? Or if, they did have some sort of other relationship going on and she got pregnant and had an abortion, which maybe was the first time she went and disappeared. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe like it was the second time. I don't know. And he was connected and he was upset. Or he didn't want anyone to say anything to spoil his name or anything. I don't know. I just feel like out of everything, he seems to be the most suspicious.
Yeah. So far.
So far.
So the next theory that I have is the John Anderson theory. Do you remember John Anderson?
His name sounds very familiar. Was he the third guy in the lineup?
No, he was the guy who had hired her actually to
Right.
So he died from pneumonia in 1881. He said the case was the reason for his failed political aspirations, but he died a very wealthy man. He'd been interested in spiritualism, and he said that he had been visited many times and tormented by Mary's spirit until the end of his days, which sounds to me like, probably he was tormented by her spirit, but also kind of could be a guilty conscience. I don't know.
Yeah.
A lawyer said that he had actually paid Edgar Allan Poe a lot of money to write a book about the case to detract attention away from him.
Interesting.
But why did Poe have to battle with newspapers to have his work printed and die penniless if he had been given a bunch of money from this really rich guy?
Yeah, that doesn't add up.
I don't know why the lawyer would come up with that theory or why he would say it, but
yeah, that doesn't make sense.
It's kind of a random weird little blip. I don't really think that Anderson killed her, but I do think he might be connected.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties into my theory and also what Edgar Allan Poe thought happened. So in Poe's story, he never actually names who he thinks the killer is, which I think is kind of smart.
Probably good. Yeah.
But in the story, she had kept company with a, quote, swarthy naval officer, end quote, who may very well have killed her, although by what means we are not sure. Did he murder her outright, or lead her into a fatal accident, a plan of concealment, end quote. So the theory here is that William Clearcut was the perpetrator. And I am down for this. I think this is the case.
Wait a minute. William Clearcut. These people involved.
He was the first one she dated. He was a sailor.
Right.
There wasn't too much known about him at the time.
The one that got, like, dismissed off of that it wasn't him.
Exactly. He got dismissed really quickly off of the case that it wasn't him. So he was a seaman on the ship, the North Carolina, and he boarded at the house for a short amount of time. He did end up calling on Mary on July 3rd, which, if you remember, that was just like a couple weeks before she passed away. We don't know the reason for his visit. And why was visiting her one of his first priorities on coming back into port?
Yeah, that is weird.
He claimed he had never seen her again after that visit, and that he was staying with his sister until July, and then he went to New Bedford for a week. He arrived back in New York City on July 24th, then stayed with his sister again, and he said that he visited a Mrs. Anderson. And it's interesting because he is actually related to John Anderson.
Huh. So that would work.
He tried to board his ship on July 26th, but it was too late. It was too late in the day, so he had to get on the boat the next day. When he was asked about his whereabouts the day of the murder, he said he was in New Bedford with this woman that he was seeing, but this contradicts his earlier statement that he had been staying with his sister on the 25th.
Oh.
He swears he hadn't been to Hoboken in over a year. He ended up bordering...
Well, who would say they were there?
Yeah, right? He ended up bordering the ship on the 26th, but this was kind of weird because he hadn't spent his pay money, which apparently was notable because apparently sailors would usually spend their pay money while they were on shore, and then they would go back and get on their ship.
Right, they'd party it up.
So it was kind of weird and notable that he still had his pay money.
Yeah, what was he doing if he wasn't out there drinking with his buddies?
Right? So, as I said, he was related to Anderson, but we're not sure exactly what this relationship was. I think this could explain John Anderson's fixation on the case and why he felt so guilty at the end of his life. Like, I think it's possible that he helped cover up the crime.
Because they were related?
Yeah, and he had a lot of money. Remember, I said he was, like, really wealthy and his business did really well. So I think that could be why Clearcut was able to get out of the police's clutches so easily and quickly. I think that Anderson paid them
that would make
to let him go. Sense. After Anderson died, remember I said that lawyer said that Poe had been paid a lot of money. It doesn't make sense that he would say that unless he really did. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing.
I mean, we know that Poe's a gambler too, and like has a drinking problem.
So it is possible that his money just went down the drain.
Yeah. Or maybe he just wasn't supposed to talk about it.
Later, I'm not sure exactly when, it's reported that a shipping agent on the ship that Clearcut had been on handed over a pair of pants to the police that he had found, stained with what looked like blood, and he said that Clearcut left them behind.
Oh my word.
And the knots in the dress were tied with a sailor's knot.
That's right.
And the tavern keeper described her companion as being of dark complexion.
That's right.
I think this could mean that, he was like tanned. He was a sailor.
Yeah,
he was out all day.
Sailor.
I think her previous disappearance could have been they went off together. Maybe she was having an abortion then. That's why I had that whole epiphany earlier. Like maybe that earlier
like maybe the lady was not lying. It was just weirdly connected in a way that she couldn't say when she was, had a feverish mind.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I think. I think he was mad when he called on her on July 3rd because she was engaged to Payne now.
Yeah.
So he was like, what? You're with another person now? Like, kind of like Edgar Allan Poe and Elmira.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is interesting.
This would also explain why she lied to Payne, why she said she was going to her aunt's if she actually wasn't.
Right.
Because she could have been going out with Clearcut on the day that she was killed. He was also strong enough to carry her, and he knew enough about boats to get her into a boat and take her out into the water.
Right. Without having to get more help.
And I think it's interesting that he was disregarded early on as a suspect. I actually think that makes him more suspicious.
I think so too, because I had completely forgotten about him during this whole thing. So, all right, forget about it, Cronwell or whatever the other guy's name was.
Yeah,
I think that you are innocent. I think it's this guy.
I am definitely sold on the William Clearcut. thing.
Yeah.
And he got away with it.
It makes complete sense. And he did. He got scot away. Mm-hmm. Scot clean.
So we're going to talk a little bit about Poe because he actually died in a really mysterious way as well. And it connects to this case. It has a similarity in something that
that's
happens
weird.
To this case. So after the case happens, Poe moves around the eastern seaboard. He's trying to make a living with his writing. He's not doing too well. In 1844, he returned to New York after leaving, and he became sub-editor of the New York Mirror. In 1845, he publishes The Raven, which is the story or the poem that really makes him, it really makes a name for him. So he gets some money from that, and he's living comfortably for a minute. And then in 1847, his wife dies, and he is devastated. Literary critics believe that he would be dead really quickly after this because he just was so upset about it.
Which is like, you know, even though she was 13 and his cousin when they got married, like, I think that's very sweet that it seems like they had a good marriage.
Yeah.
You know, and we're close, it would seem.
Poe ends up going on a little wild spree of alcohol abuse, basically, in 1849. In the summer, he was like, I'm going to be done with alcohol. He quit. And he goes back to his first fiancée, Elmira, that he had first fallen in love with all those years ago.
Oh.
And they get engaged again. And then, like a few weeks later, Poe leaves Richmond, and his whereabouts are unknown. He just completely disappears. He's gone. And then on October 3rd, he's found by an employee of the Baltimore Sun, incoherent and delirious, dressed in other people's clothes, and lying in a gutter.
That is creepy. I don't like that.
Isn't that weird?
That's very odd.
He was taken to Washington College Hospital. They assumed he was drunk, but he never regained consciousness enough to tell him what happened. His last days were filled with, quote, vacant converse with spectral and imaginary objects on the walls.
Ooh, creepy.
His face was pale and his whole person drenched in perspiration. And that's from the doctor who took care of him in his last days.
But it wasn't laudanum?
No, it wasn't laudanum, but they don't really know what it was. 5 hours past midnight, Edgar Allan Poe died on October 7th, 1849. He used his last breath to say, quote, Lord help my poor soul, unquote. And no autopsy was ever performed on him.
That's weird.
It is weird. There are a bunch of theories on what could have happened to him. Like, gang violence is purported here as well.
Huh.
And I think that that's interesting because if it's a gang, I think maybe it is connected to the Mary
that would
Rogers
make sense.
Thing
They weren't happy with him
his
writing
story.
about it. Yeah.
But there's a lot of questions there too, and we don't have any answers for either of these deaths. I think that it is kind of clear that he was also murdered.
I think if you show up pretty much anywhere incoherent in other people's clothes, this is not a normal thing you would do to yourself.
Yeah. I think
and where are you finding these other people's clothes? That's what creeps me out.
Right.
Like,
that's the thing that really gets me too, is okay, I guess
it's like what happened to your clothes.
But why are you in somebody else's clothes? Yeah.
I guess if you're drunk, you could have a wild night, end up in some other random person's clothes. But that just seems quite unlikely.
Yeah. And another thing,
and unlikely that they didn't find the other person whose clothes they belonged to.
Right? Nobody ever said anything.
Because you'd think if it was just an accident, like, oh, he was drunk and this happened, that they would be like, can I have my clothes? Like, he wore them and passed away. Like,
exactly.
I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't want to draw attention to it, but it seems weird.
And also, the similarity to Daniel Payne's death is...
Yeah.
It's probably not connected, but it's interesting.
But it's very odd.
Yeah.
A very strange coincidence.
Yeah, right? Especially since he wrote about the case and the woman and they're connected.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's so eerie to me.
And since they don't know how he died.
Right?
Either. Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about more theories of how Edgar Allan Poe died in my Patreon special, the Spooky Weird Book Club. And I'm also going to talk about some of my favorite Edgar Allan Poe stories and poems. So if you're interested in hearing any more theories about him or my thoughts on his poetry, you can head on over to our Patreon and check out that. And I would be honored to have you in my Spooky Weird Book Club. But This episode is now coming to a close. Those who had wronged Mary and those whom she loved alike saw her spectral form after death.
Ooh.
Daniel Payne, John Anderson, and Frederica Loss all claimed to see the ghost of Mary. Daniel killed himself to be with the one he loved, in my opinion. And Anderson was tormented by the thought of her for the rest of his days.
Oh.
Anderson and Loss both claimed to be visited by Mary just before they passed away. And many more claim to have encountered her around the ruins of Sybil's Cave to this day, although it is Edgar Allan Poe's tale which cements her place in the afterlife, for because of him, her story will be remembered forever. So is anybody out there who has read Edgar Allan Poe's The Mystery of Marie Roget? Whenever anybody reads it next, please remember the girl who is behind the story, Mary Cecilia Rogers, a beautiful young woman who lived a lovely life and deserved for it to continue. Is anybody out there? This podcast is written and produced by Sophie Robertson Cormier and hosted by Sophie and her sister, Rachel Richards. If you liked that episode, please make sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram and share our podcast with your spooky weird friends. Thanks, and spook you next time!
Say it loud for the people at the back.